I've been doing a lot of singer review videos, and recently I've been thinking about how this is kind of exhausting for the average viewer. If you want to get an overview over our magnificent IEM world, then you have to dig through a lot of videos to get an idea of what sound do I actually want, how much money do I want to spend, and just all the options to choose from. So I think doing comparisons is actually kind of like more pleasant for the viewer, so to say. Looking at the recent IEM releases, there's actually a bigger focus on getting like a good bass presence while still retaining like a bass quality, not getting like overly boomy and just muddy sound signature here with just some sibilance in the treble to kind of balance that. That was like 2 years ago or 3 years ago was pretty bad with these kind of sound signatures, but now it actually got a lot better, especially in the recent months. So I've been looking at two budget releases here, namely the I don't know how you really pronounced it, but I guess it's Hidizs. I don't know. It's the MS1 Galaxy. We're just gonna call it Galaxy from here on now. And the KZ Castor, which is more popular and just more well known, I guess, because KZ is actually a pretty well known brand. So that's why I was pretty curious about that one too. And it actually has these switches here. I'm gonna show you more of that in the review. Hey guys, I'm just in the process of editing the new video, and I noticed that I never actually said which KZ caster I am talking about, because there are actually two versions out there. The Castor Black, the bass boosted version, which I am talking about and I have here, and another version that adheres to the Harman target, which I guess it's just called the Castor Harman, whatever. And yeah, just so you know, we're talking about the Castor Black with a bass enhanced sound. So this review is all about the bass. Of course, I will talk about the mid-range and treble too. It's just these are especially bass focused budget IEMs. And I think I'm gonna make a kind of bass IEM comparison with more expensive IEMs, but we're gonna start with the not so pricey ones here. So as usual, let's start with build quality and let's begin with the KZ Castor here. Build quality on the Castor is pretty good, especially looking at the pretty cheap price. It's got a thick metal backplate with a vent here. Yeah, there. And the stylish Castor name label here. It's kind of heavy, but not annoyingly so. So feels pretty well built, pretty quality. Otherwise, it's the typical see-through shell, the one you get with a lot of IEMs nowadays, where you can take a look inside the IEM. Looks pretty cool, but again, most of this is covered with the backplate here. And obviously on the side you have the switches, where you can elevate certain frequencies. And I have to admit, I expected the switches to be more flimsy and easily breakable, and was pretty surprised to see that this is not the case. I don't know if you can see this in the camera. They do not really protrude out of the shell, but they are placed like deeper in there, so they do not just break apart when you accidentally like brush. They do not feel like they even stick out here. It's just a really slight, like you feel there's something there, but it's not enough to move the switches or to like break anything here. It's done pretty nice. And you really do need this little helper here to use the switches, because otherwise it's quite difficult. But with this thing here, wait, let's put the cable out of the way here. You can do it like this here, and it's like a little, just like a little click, and then it's pushed into the other direction. And I wouldn't advise to do it with your fingers. Maybe if you have like pretty long and kind of thin nails, like kind of pointy nails, I guess then it would work. If you can emulate this thing with your nails, then it will work. But otherwise, I would use this thing here. Cable is the typical KZ cable for the price. It's nothing special, but it's not especially bad either. It's just like a really standard cable. Contrast to the Castor, the Galaxy feels a lot lighter. Material wise, It feels more plasticky, obviously, but regarding looks, I think it looks pretty nice. Again, you have this see-through shell in a bluish color. This time you do not have like a metal backplate. It's basically all the same material here, but it still feels really nice. Like, it does not feel cheap. And you have this really cool geometric design on the backplate that changes when you move it around. Kind of fancy thing here, just like the things you looked at through this tube thingy when you were young, you know, with the geometric forms and everything. Kind of resembles that and reminded me about that. But all in all, it feels pretty well built. The cable is quite nice. It feels a lot better than the one on the Castor. But the thing here is, like, this part of the cable here feels really, really good for the price. And it's actually one of the, really, I would say one of the maybe not best, but definitely one of the better ones for the price range. But then you have this thing here where the cable, like, yeah, where the cable goes into the left and right sections of the IEM cable. This feels a bit more flimsy. Tangles up a little bit more here. Nothing especially bad. Like, this part feels worse than this part. And so all in all, I guess it's an okay cable. It's fine. Next point to talk about is the comfort. And again, let's start with the Castor here. Castor is comfortable. You only get foam tips with these, which are fine, but I never became a big fan of foam tips in general, so I changed them to some silicone ones. Cause KZ apparently tuned these for the foam tip usage. I kinda tried to do a 50-50 with silicone and foam tips just to be sure. They have a nice and secure fit, they do not move around. They're maybe a bit bulky on the outside, but I rarely noticed that. These are not small IEMs, I would say. Nothing that bothers me. The nozzle is kind of average sized, I would say. It does not disappear in your ear, but it never hurts or feels unpleasant. So no discomfort here, everything's fine. With the Galaxy, I'm kind of on the fence here, and it's a little bit different than with the Castor. It feels pretty nice at first, like you get a good seal and they have a secure fit. But after a while, I began to notice that the nozzle feels quite a bit wider than the one on the Castor, which leads to the Galaxy being somewhat uncomfortable here and there and a little painful. So it usually disappears after kind of like moving it around just for a second. All in all, it's not as comfortable as the Castor, but it still gets an okay from me. Finally, is sound. I will sort this in different sections so you can easily compare bass, the Castor bass and the Galaxy bass and the mid-range and so on. So let's start with the Castor here and let's start with bass. The Castor has these switches here, which you of course already know about. They can change the sound. And to my surprise, it works quite good and is way less gimmicky than I expected it to be. It's explained in the manual which switches do what, but basically the first two are to boost the lower frequencies when in the up position, and the last two boost the higher mid-range and treble. It's pretty easy to see which is up and which is down because there are numbers written on there. That way you can see at the moment I have like the switches 1 and 2 up and the other ones are down, so bass is elevated. That's how easy it works. I will give a short overview over what I think of the different sounds that can be achieved here. Obviously here for bass, so when talking about the sound and not explicitly mentioning otherwise, I have it on the most bass heavy setting, which is, like I just showed you, 1 and 2 up. With the switches in stock position, it feels like a Castor bass light, so it's still bassy, and just regarding the amount of bass, kind of resembles the Truth Ear Zero, I would say, and that's a nice setting most people will be comfortable with a boost to the upper mid-range and the highs, so basically the first two switches down and the second two switches up. That makes the sound somewhat harsh and actually has too much treble for my ears. All switches activated is kind of fun, but takes away the characteristic smoothness and feels a bit edgy in the upper mids. With that out of the way, let's get back to the bass setting and start with a more detailed analysis of both sound profiles. Bass on the Castor has a nice presence, focuses more on the mid bass than the sub bass, so it's more of a warm and punchy sound instead of this clean rumble where bass takes a step back when it's not needed. Still, lower bass is obviously present enough. There should be enough rumble here for most audiences. And although mid bass does not reach into the lower mid range that much, a boost here will lead to a more boomy bass, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, you bought this IEM for its bass, and in terms of how it sounds, I can assure you it is just what you expect. Still, I have to say it's as clean as it could be for the amount of bass presence, which is a surprise and a very good thing for this price range. Be it rock music, EBM, or basically anything where bass notes are played, they are taking the lead here and are in the foreground. The MS1 Galaxy has a huge boost in the bass, with lots of punch and rumble. It's emphasized across the whole range, so obviously it's not the cleanest experience and the Castor has the upper hand here. I do have to mention the absolutely enjoyable amount of punch and especially fat, rumbly lower bass that hits your ear canals here. It still does not feel like it is muddying up the other frequencies that much where it becomes an annoying amount of bass, but it's always there. I'm actually having a lot of fun listening to the Galaxy because it has this warm and bassy sound that softens up the mid-range and, well, the overall detail, which I guess is a negative for a lot of people who prefer like really clean instrumental work. But it works good within the sound profile here and will appeal to a lot of people. In comparison to the Castor, the upper bass does not roll off that much, nor is there a dip in the transition to the lower mid-range, which contributes to the warm sound and gives that thick foundation to everything you're listening. But that is also the reason why the Castor has an overall cleaner bass and just a cleaner following mid-range than the Galaxy. So obviously this comparison is not about mid-range focused IEMs, so you should cut both IEMs some slack here. Mid-range is cut in two parts on the Castor, whereas the lower and center mid-range is somewhat recessed. The upper mid-range is a little elevated and all in all typical for a more V-shaped IEM that focused on clarity and bass. So let's pick that apart a bit. Like I said, lower mid-range is pushed back to get a cut between the bass boost and the mid-range to not let the bass muddy up the other frequencies. That works, but because the dip basically reaches through a lot of the mid-range, instruments can sound thin, as do male voices, because parts of their body is taken away. So these can appear a bit thin and sometimes harsh, but overall it's okay, I would say. Then the upper mid-range is more present again, giving some much appreciated attack and clarity that instruments need to be heard within this sound profile. This also does not change with the switches, it just becomes less apparent when you're on the more bassy settings because the bass smooths that out quite well. Female voices are kinda nice though, not over the top shouty, but still very clean and emotional. So all in all, the mid-range is still okay for many genres, but I think there are IEMs who just do it better. So as I said before in the bass section, the lower mid-range of the MS1 Galaxy does get influenced by the upper bass in the sense that there is no clean cut, and that gives it that thick and smooth mid-range. Male vocals sound really nice, guitar work again may not be the cleanest, but it never gets out of this smooth comfort zone. Looking at the whole frequency response graph, the following mid-range after the lower part is pretty much recessed, which does take its toll in the form of instruments not sounding especially clean. Everything here is kind of veiled and a bit distant. I mean, not to the point where I was bothered by that, but I kinda like this sound signature sometimes. And again, it just supports the relaxed sound, and I really like the still present but never too aggressive sound of instrument here. Whereas male vocals do sound really expressive and strong, female vocals get smoothed over quite a bit. Again, that's because of the dip in the upper mid-range, which may makes you miss this. Let me dig through my audiophile vocabulary here. This angelic quality that female voices sometimes have. You may miss this. In normal words, that basically means they are less intense and could be boring for some listeners. I do like it though. They again never get harsh, they never get too over the top, and yeah, it's just a really nice and relaxed mid-range. So where the Castor tries to throw in some clarity here to give the instruments more attack, more presence, and just a more detailed approach, the Galaxy goes through with its smoothness and thick veiled sound. The bassy profile just goes right into the mid-range here instead of having a clean cut between both of these frequency sections. Now on to the higher frequencies. The treble on the Castor is somewhat boosted, but in a way that is fitting with the bassy sound profile. There are no sibilant vocals or piercing elements here. Extension is also okay, like cymbals sound completely fine. It's not an extremely open or airy sounding IEM, but nobody expected that here. It's basically average in that regard. Instruments that use higher frequencies come through quite good. For example, strings sound really nice. Drums especially sound really powerful, like snares who utilize the lower treble and kick drums where lower frequencies, like bassy frequencies, are important, have to work together to sound good, and the Castor does that pretty well. It's just a really groovy sound signature here. Looking at the treble on the MS1 Galaxy here, it kind of follows the laid-back sound signature. Still, it does not appear dull or blunted, but people who do not like a certain darkness in their music will miss their transparency here. There's no bite in the treble region, but in this context, I'm saying this as a good thing, because the treble just fits here. I mean, who wants another V shape with cymbals that cut through the mix like butter? It's just really well done here. People who like treble, like clarity, they will miss it here. And just like with the mid-range, the difference here is that the Castor still tries to achieve some clarity within its higher frequencies, whereas the Galaxy just go through with a thick and relaxed sound. That does mean that the Castor has better extension, better airiness, and just a cleaner sound. There's no sibilance, no harshness or piercing sounds on the Galaxy, and I can definitely recommend that one here for travel sensitive users. They will really like what Hidizs has done here. Comparing the technical performance of both IEMs, again, it's pretty subjective, but the Galaxy does take a hit here with its lower mid-range emphasis and overall laid-back sound. The bass just smoothed over instrument separation and detail retrieval. It's not bad, but the Castor does it better. Imaging is also a bit better on the Castor, same reason as I just mentioned. In most cases, if you have a relaxed, laid-back, veiled sound signature, all the technical stuff will be better on headphones, IEMs, who have a focus on cleaner sound. To come to an end here, who should now choose the Castor and who should choose the Galaxy? And yes, you can actually make a clean cut here. Castor is for listeners who want their bass, but still with a relatively clean mid-range and treble. It's bassy and smooth, but there's still bite and a lot of attack in the sound. Whereas the Galaxy is the one for you if you like an all-around, laid-back, warm and bassy sound that will never get fatiguing, and you basically do not care about the best technical performance for the price. As a side note, after I was done with the assessment of the sound here, I was looking around what other people had to say about the Galaxy, and one guy said a word that really expresses the whole sound profile for me here. It sounds analog. The Galaxy just sounds more analog, whereas the Castor has a digital touch, which is both neither good nor bad. It's just depends on your preference. But I think that's a cool way to look at it and a cool analogy for the sound if you just want to paint a picture in your mind here. That's it for this review. I hope I could clear up some things here for you and help you decide which IEM to buy or not to buy. So yeah, have a nice day and see you next time.